Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me for coffee on Halloween. It's a fun day. We have a costume contest going on. Somebody asked me this morning on LinkedIn what type of pirate I am, and I said I'm whichever pirate has to clean up the bed chambers and keep the cabin clean for the captain because my son is Captain Jack Sparrow today. So I guess that makes me like the scullery maid pirate. But we're excited to kick off today's episode. And if you aren't already aware, there is a costume contest going on today. So the winner will get a Chick-Fil-A gift card because my son chose that as his favorite restaurant. And so all you have to do to enter for a chance to win that gift card is drop a picture in the comments of the show here. It can be your costume. It can be your kids' costumes, your dog's costume, your coworker's costume, whatever you want. Go ahead and enter that for a chance to win. Gad is going to help me choose a winner at the end of today's show. My podcast producer, Aaron, didn't dress up today, so make sure you all tell him how lame he is in the comments as well. Otherwise, I was going to make him come on the show, but not today. Not today. This is episode 24. Very, very lucky to be making it through almost a year of podcast now. And so we'll have to do a special anniversary show here coming up when we hit that 1 year mark. But today I have my guest, Gad Levanon. He is the Chief Economist from the Burning Glass Institute. I'm going to go ahead and bring him on here this morning. And Gad, why don't you tell us what you're dressed up as today?
Thank you, Samantha, for having me. And it's hard to tell, but I'm also dressed up. I told my wife that I'll dress up as a good husband today.
I like that. I think that's a great answer. Yeah, for anyone who doesn't already know, can you give us a little bit of background on who you are, what you do, and where you work now, and just kind of help us understand the angle you're going to be coming from today?
Sure. So I'm an economist. Before my current job, which I'll talk about in a second, I worked for 18 years at the conference board, and over time I became more and more interested in labor markets, and that's the focus of my work now. A little over a year and a half ago, I joined my current job, the Burning Glass Institute, as their chief economist and head of research, and we are trying to be a major think tank in the area of labor markets and the education, the brookings of labor market, as the president likes to say. I'm happy to be here.
And you also do some work, I think, in academics, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm an adjunct professor in NYU.
Okay, very nice. And so you live in New York? Is that where you're coming from?
I live in New York, in a place called Roosevelt Island, which most people don't know about. It's an island between Manhattan and Queens on the East River.
I honestly didn't know about it, but I've only been to New York once, and I went to Manhattan, so I can say that I've never heard of that. So I'll have to put it on the list of places to visit next time.
You should, yeah.
Well, Gad, I think that obviously one of the reasons I reached out to you is because there has been a lot of speculation and a lot of conversation around a recession, the potential for a recession, the soft landing, and the avoidance of a recession. And then also a lot of chatter around labor markets. And I operate in the freight market. That's where most of our viewers are, as we've discussed. And so I think a lot of us in the freight markets are looking expectantly towards the future of the condition of the macroeconomy as an indicator for what we can expect as we're interacting in a freight market that is heavily dependent on macroeconomic activity. And so I just wanted to jump right into this today. We're going to get right into what everyone's expecting, I think, here from the get-go, and then kind of pick that apart more as we go. But can you just kind of talk to me about current state of the economy, potential future states, chances of recession? A lot of people said we were in a recession over the last year. Are we not? And just kind of talk through where we're at in terms of a recession, or maybe also help us understand what a soft landing is, and if that's been accomplished, could be accomplished, and what's going on right now.
So there's a lot happening. Maybe let me explain some of the terms, and then I'll tell you where I think we are and where we'll be. So lending is in the context of will inflation go back to kind of the Fed's target of 2%, which we are now above it, and we've been well above it a year ago. So the question is, are we going to go back to 2% inflation without entering a recession? That's soft landing. Hard landing is we're going to go back to 2%, but it will require a recession. And I think that at least in 2024, in the next year, the most likely scenario is neither of those. So I think the scenario is no lending. So I think we simply won't reach 2% inflation. The inflation is coming down, but it's still well above normal. The wage growth, which is an important determinant of inflation, just this morning, the employment cost index, which is the best measure of wage growth that there is, came out, and in the last 12 months, we've been growing at like around 4.5%. It's coming down, but very slowly. So before the pandemic, we were at 3% or even less. So we are still at a tight labor market, at an environment of rapid wage growth, and I think we won't reach an inflation of 2% in the coming year, especially since the economy is not showing any signs of slowing down. In fact, if anything, in the last 3 to 6 months, there's been an acceleration in economic activity, especially consumer spending and government spending. So that's a long answer.
So let me ask this then. Why does it not feel that way? Because we talk about like, well, you know, there is a lot of strong activity going on, and why do we not feel that confident, and why do we not feel like this economy is really, you know, strong and going? Is it just because we're coming off of such unprecedented highs that we're still on a decline and we're feeling that contractionary pressure, but yet it's still, like, if we compare that to the last decades, is it still a strong overall economy?
Yeah, well, I think part of it depends where you are in the economy. So there are different sectors. Now, you in transportation, so you're much more impacted by the goods part of the economy,
right?
Which is indeed not doing as well. Like the industries that are really pushing the economy forward are still some recovery in leisure and hospitality, healthcare, some other services, government spending. So those are the industries that are still pulling the economy forward. And people who are in transportation or manufacturing or retail may not feel that strength. So again, where you are depends on where you sit.
Right. And then I have another question too that you mentioned about the 2% target for inflation. And I think I found myself starting to wonder, how much does that matter? Like, do we really need to hit 2% if we have had such strong wage growth? Because if wage growth has been above previous trend lines and expectations or averages, is it therefore not okay to say, okay, well, then we can also allow inflation to sit acceptable at 3% instead of 2%, or pick the number? Why is it that we're still so hyper-focused on the 2% number?
So this is a very good question, and there are various people who would agree with this approach. You're not unique in the world of economics.
I'm glad I'm not crazy.
But I think where the Fed is coming from is they want to have credibility. So one of the reasons why for many years inflation go above 2% is because all of the economic actors in the economy believe that it will not go above 2%. So if for example, it goes to 3 or 4% and stays there, then the Fed's reputation or credibility in protecting 3%, let's say we are moving now to a 3% inflation goal, and the Fed is saying, we are committed to 3%. But then, after missing the 2%, people will be less trusting of the Fed to control the 3%. So I think that's part of it. Like, it's very important, the credibility of the Fed in maintaining an inflation goal, because a lot of what determines inflation is inflation expectations.
Right.
So in order to anchor inflation expectations at 2%, the Fed has to protect that goal.
And I think someone like me hears that and we think, we don't really care. Like, we'd rather you say, hey, 3% is acceptable for the sake of having a stronger, healthier economy and avoiding a recession, than saying, because we set the expectation at 2%, it's our job to hit 2%, we're not going to lessen up and we're going to potentially risk a recession to hit that target because we said we would. So I understand what you're saying in theory, that it would be important to say, this is the goal and this is what we're trying to do. But then, I think there's a lot of people now that I'm starting to hear take more like this stance of, okay, but maybe that this is very unprecedented economic time. And so maybe we now can change the rules, bend the rules a little bit.
Well, I think, there's also like the personal things here, like the Fed's chairman, he's already being blamed for letting inflation go up and making mistakes. And, he thinks of his legacy. So maybe he has a stronger interest to not be the Fed, the chairman when inflation went out of control. So, there are many, many reasons why someone would do something. But I think it's also a matter of long-term versus short-term. I do think that the long-term credibility of the Fed is something that is important. So I can see both sides. Yeah.
Yeah. And I do think that we can all agree that inflation was absolutely out of control when they began the tightening. It was every graph I've ever looked at, or you've seen it, it was just like obscenely high all of a sudden. And so it had to be controlled. And it took pretty drastic measures to get that tamed back in rather quickly. So on that note, can you talk to me a little bit about, well, let me do this first. Have we recently entered an official recession by any sort of definition in the last year and a half or 2 years?
No, I don't think that, to be honest, I don't think we were even very close. So there were periods the fun about being an economist, that there are various measures, and each one you can take and tell a story, and then you can take another indicator and tell the opposite story. So, but I think in terms of economic activity, there we got pretty close to a recession. I think there were several quarters where we were close to zero, like in GDP measures or measures like that. We didn't go below zero, but we were close to zero for a while. But at the same time, employment throughout the entire period kept growing very rapidly.
Right.
And so if you think of a recession as a combination of both what's happening in GDP, but also what's happening in employment growth, then I think we are pretty far from a recession.
Okay. And I like the call out there on employment, because I've seen, throughout the last couple of years when people are saying, oh, we're already in a recession, it feels like we're headed for a recession. I think that's been the number one rebuttal that I've seen to that is the, well, if that's true, we have one of the most impressive labor markets that has ever existed, coexisted with the recessionary period. So I think the labor market has been above average even in its strength in the last couple of years. So talk to me a little bit about the soft landing description that I've heard. And we've heard people talking about this. It's not really new anymore, because we've been trying to determine if the Fed was able to achieve a soft landing since they began those interest rate hikes. With that, I think the soft landing was always the ideal goal. But I think as it's drug out longer and longer in this kind of just lull of an economic time period, I think we're all starting to wonder if it's actually going to be achieved or if we will end up in a recession in 2024. And so, what would it take at this point for us to say the soft landing was successfully achieved? What indicators do we look at, and what has to happen for that to be accomplished?
So I think it depends on inflation. Is inflation going to get to 2% or very close to it? It's not out of the question that it will happen because inflation has been coming down. But again, as I said earlier, I think the most likely scenario is that in 2024 we will still not reach there. I think we'll still be at around 3% inflation during 2024. Partly because the labor market is still very tight and wage growth is still quite solid, as the employment cost index today shows. So I think we'll simply, and at the same time, I doubt that the Fed, especially entering an election year, will hike interest rates dramatically. So I think the most likely scenario is that we'll still have a growing economy with inflation that is more at like 3% than at 2%. So,
and you think that that would last through most of 2024 before they would, and then at that point, if say we make it to the end of 24 with the 3%, do they continue to tighten to get that down?
I think, yeah. So I think that is, so I think like what will happen is that there will continuously be inflation pressures because we are going to continue to be in a tight labor market, and the Fed will have to slow down the economy significantly, which wasn't able to do so far, and so that I think. I don't know when it will happen or if it will happen, but what I am pretty confident about is that the economy will grow relatively slowly in the coming years because the Fed will force it to grow slowly because of the inflation pressure that are driven by the tight labor market.
Okay. And now I have to ask, I'm full of questions today. You're just not
Sure.
going to get any breaks. When we're talking about the labor market, and I know that you said that you study that quite a bit, is there anything that could change with the labor market in 2024 to actually help with that correction of inflation? Like, what could be a potential catalyst for an increase in unemployment or a decrease in wage growth, or would a decrease in wage growth even be a bad thing right now, or would it kind of be acceptable? Like, what are some of the things that you're looking at within employment data and labor market data now and over the next year that might give us an indicator of which path we're more likely to head down, the soft landing or the recession?
So I think one of the surprising things in 2023 was the very rapid growth in labor supply or in the labor force, which I think many were surprised about. And there are two reasons for that. One is that the labor force participation rate continued to increase in 2023, and now it's kind of breaking all kinds of records. But even more important than that is the huge flow of new immigration. That is, I think we all talk about like what's happening in the border and how many people are going in. What I think is catching less headlines is how many of them are ending in the labor market, and many do. So that really boosted the supply of labor, and I think is one of the reasons why wage growth, why the labor market became a little less tight in 2023, why wage growth did come down, perhaps more than expected, but not enough. And I think it's especially in like where those people work, they are mostly people without a bachelor degree who work in kind of manual services and some blue collar occupations. So that's where we've seen a bigger decline in wage growth. So I don't know what will happen at the border, if it will continue at that rate, but that's, I think, one factor that could help lower wage growth and inflation if
Right.
it doesn't change. Yeah.
So you're saying you've seen a decline in wage growth in blue collar workers versus white collar?
Yeah, in blue collar and manual services, um, we've seen in the last year a much faster slowdown in wage growth than we've seen in white collar and kind of higher educated people. But that is after like a year or two where the blue collar wages went through the roof.
Right.
And so now it's coming back. Now they're about growing at the same rate after several years where blue collar and manual services workers seen a much faster wage growth.
Right. And I know that we felt that in our industry too, specifically where a lot of roles in our industry, forklift operators, warehouse workers, became incredibly difficult to source and staff. And, if somebody put up $25 an hour on a banner on their building, the person next door put up 27 an hour to try to get the talent. And so we had all this inflationary pressure on labor within our industry. We also had, 5-year contracts that were executed by unions in the rail, ports, and all of those spaces that had unprecedented wage growth that will continue on now
Yeah,
for the next 5 years. And I was, saying, at least over a year ago that people think we were going to hit that 2% inflationary target by reverting things back. But at least in our industry, especially, where we're at with elevated pricing in a lot of spaces for labor and stuff, I didn't see that reverting back as quickly because of all these multi-year contracts. And,
yeah,
or let's say you go out and hire, 100 workers at $29 an hour. Well, just because you could hire someone now at 25 doesn't mean you can go back and give all 100 of them a pay cut and then
yeah,
that's acceptable. So I think the labor market, the progress that was made in the labor market, in my opinion, is probably some of the stickiest progress to you don't really just get to back out of that, right? It's there.
yeah, and that's you see it very well in like when you break wage growth between job switchers and job stayers.
Mm-hmm.
So job switchers are people who move to another job, and job stayers are people who stayed in their job. So during the, like, let's say 2021, 2022, the wages of the job switchers was extremely rapid because they kind of enjoyed the labor shortage and the wage hike. People who stayed in their job, they got kind of average raises, which
Right.
kind of kept them behind a little. But and now they want to pay back, like they are getting it. So the wage growth of job stayers is not coming down; it still remains high. Job switchers, they are experiencing kind of more impacted by market forces, which are now cooling a little.
Right. Yeah, I know. I think that's a great call out because a lot of people were able to pretty significantly take a pay jump if they changed roles because they were in maybe what they did was in demand or everyone was making so much money specifically in our industry as well in 2020 into 2021 that they were paying top dollar to bring in a lot of talent that they needed to keep up with the growth they were seeing. But then for everyone who stayed in their roles and took maybe an average cost of living increase, then got hit with inflation and increased fuel costs and things like that. I think there's been probably more pressure and more demands for raises within those job stayers. I could definitely see that. So yeah,
Can I ask you a question?
yes.
Well, I was thinking about, like, as I was talking about the immigration. Um, do you know? So I wonder, like, many of those immigrants don't have a work permit, but they still end up in the labor market. I'm wondering in the transportation, since a lot of the jobs are regulated, like you have to have a license for a forklift or for a truck or for do do non illegal immigrants get to transportation a lot, or because of the regulation they are kind of kept out?
Yeah, I'm so probably not the best expert, but if we have anybody listening in the comments, I want them to weigh in. But here's my 2 cents on that. I did a brief stint in operations. I would say that no, probably not illegal immigrants. However, there is a huge population of truck drivers who are on work visas or permits from the Eastern Europe, from Asia, from Africa, from Haiti, from the South America, so from potentially Mexico, but it's very heavily populated in the actual truck driving space, and a lot of warehousing roles with immigrants. And I do believe that it's my understanding that quite a few of them are on permits tied to the companies that they come to be employed by in those driving roles or whatever it is. So they come here and then they get the certifications, and as long as they're employed by that company, then they can stay and continue to work. And so I know that makes up a pretty large percentage. And so that's the best answer I can give to your question, but I'm going to flip it back now because it was one of my questions to ask you. Just trying to understand what's going on right now geopolitically, because there's quite a bit going on, right? I mean, we had the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and now we have war in the Middle East looking, combat already happening, wars being talked about. And so we've also had some tension with China, and just there's been a lot going on since the pandemic started, more than at least I'm familiar with really in my lifetime, with so much going on different geopolitical fronts. And so how does this impact the U.S. economy? And is there a threat for any damage done to our GDP or trade partnerships or anything like that you are following or you are looking at? Does it strengthen us? Does it boost us in some way? Just anything.
Yeah.
I don't even know what it would necessarily be, but what are we looking at geopolitically right now as that affects the U.S. economy?
Yeah, so I think the Ukraine-Russia thing, it had impact on some commodity prices and oil, and the war in the Middle East may have some, although so far, like the main producers of oil, like Iran and Saudi Arabia, are kind of out of it. I do think so in that regard, I don't think there will be maybe some impact, although, in the US, oil prices are not, they used to be a negative thing, an increase in oil prices, but because we became such large producers of oil, there are many areas in the US who benefit greatly from higher oil prices. So the net effect on the US is not clear anymore. I think China is potentially a very big story. I've been wondering for years because they kept growing through their real estate sector, and there's clearly a bubble there. They invested too much. I was wondering how long that will continue, and it seems to finally not continue.
Yeah.
So that could be a big deal. I can see like a big drop in China, but China we are not big exporters to China. We are huge importers from China, and that I think will continue. So overall, I think that the geopolitical, they are impacting a lot of other people, the US perhaps less so.
Okay. Yeah, that's kind of been what I've maybe observed or felt lately, is that there's a lot going on, but if anything, almost maybe in certain sectors, it kind of boosts a little bit of our productivity or our export activity. And so just trying to understand what that looks like moving forward. And I think obviously that I would imagine those situations would become pretty fluid as we wait to see how politics advance globally right now over the next several months. So I have one more question for you, and then we're going to be coming close to time. But you do some work in academics, obviously. So I'm sure you have a lot of students that you get to interact with. I studied economics in college a little bit because I was a business major. I definitely never anticipated it being applicable to my career. But that's been I've never been more wrong, because the more I advance into, this industry and business, the more I realize that everything is tied to economics at the end of the day, if you are in business of some sort. So I think maybe that there might be some people who listen to this show sometimes that are a little overwhelmed by the idea of trying to understand macroeconomics. Do you have any suggestions for resources, places to start? Maybe just a couple things that are, if you're like, oh, if you only pay attention to one or two things, these are what I would be interested in. What are what are some ways we can all kind of become students of the macroeconomy, even if we're not in school right now?
Sure. So one of the problems with macroeconomics is that I think over in recent years, it's becoming more and more politicized. It's not an exact science, so and I think because of the polarization in the U.S. in general, people who used to be objective are not objective anymore, and they are taking sides. So I think it's very important to listen to people who are still were able to keep their objectivity over time. I have two recommendations. One is Larry Summers, and one is Jason Furman. I think both of them are great economists um, and are kind of relatively in the middle, and I think relatively objective. I used to include Paul Krugman in that list, but I think he, especially around inflation, I feel like sometimes that after I read what he writes, I know less about inflation than before I read it.
No, we don't need that. Don't need to ruin our own confidence.
So, yeah, so I think that the two names that I mentioned, I read everything they write, and I would say, like, try to ask yourself: is that person that I'm reading is he or she objective? That's sometimes more important than are they good? Because
Right.
like, even if you're good and you're not objective, you're going to give bad advice.
Yeah, no, I like that. I think that, again, the thing that kind of baffles me about economics in general is that you can take two different people with the same data set and come to two different conclusions based on how they want to interpret that data or apply it to something. So I do think that there's something to be said for kind of casting a broad net and keeping an open mind and maybe listening to, sometimes I kind of like to see who disagrees with other people and then go follow the person that they disagree with, just to kind of keep both sides of the argument out there and alive. But okay, I'm trying to figure out now how I can show Gad some pictures that we got today. But Aaron, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to do that because we're seeing comments, but we're seeing written comments and not pictures. But I'm looking here on my other computer. We have a creepy clown, a younger little girl who's a creepy clown. We have another very cute little girl who is a unicorn princess. We have a Winnie the Pooh, and then we have a little pumpkin in the comments, but I can't see a picture there. So I'm gonna toss this one up to Gad, and if you had to pick your favorite costume between a creepy clown, a unicorn princess, and what else did I say we got there? A Winnie the Pooh. Who would you pick?
I'd say the creepy clown.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. It's pretty creepy. Aaron, can we try to get a picture put up? Like, they did well. We'll drop that one in the comments, but I appreciate you helping me choose there, so I did not have to. I mean, I would like nominate myself, but that's not as.
No, you have a good costume.
Yes, my son is Captain Jack Sparrow, so we're gonna have a good time tonight. We have all the festivities planned. Oh, there we go. There's a creepy clown.
Yeah, that is creepy.
Yeah, I like it. Thanks, Aaron, for getting that one in there. I hope everyone enjoyed the conversation today. Gad, the best way to contact you if they have any questions or would like to follow up, LinkedIn, a good place to connect?
Yeah, I'm very active on LinkedIn. And also you can check out our website. If you Google Burning Glass Institute, we have all kinds of research and data there. So encourage you to go there as well.
Okay, very cool. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. I'll say, we had an economist on a couple weeks ago, and I think that this closely aligned with what we talked about a little bit there. We took it a little bit deeper this week. And so I'm feeling a little bit more confident in what I think we can expect over the next year. And I appreciate you sharing those insights with us. So, Gad, thank you so much for meeting me for coffee today.
Thank you, Samantha. It was a pleasure.